Do you know what I like to do on Sundays? I like to look at some baseball cards. I wanted to broach the subject of how to build a vintage baseball card collection or a vintage sports card collection. I think for a lot of collectors, they eventually move into vintage, right? When you and I were young and we were collecting in the 80s or 90s, when you really got into cards, you wanted to go back and start to venture into some other things. I view I view modern cards as kind of a gateway drug to the bigger items. Although nowadays they might not be bigger, but kind of a gateway to going and getting into vintage cards. And it's a little overwhelming. You know, the older guys seem to be the ones that are into vintage sports cards. And I think that's for a few reasons. Number one, when you're a little kid, it's easy to look up to a 21-year-old or a 19-year-old or a 23-year-old. But when you're older, it's like you're looking back. You're looking at young kids. And so I don't think older people are going to idolize 19 and 20 and 21-year-olds like little kids are. And so I think that leads to, as you get older, being more into older cards. The other thing is, I think as we get older, we, you're moved on with your life. You're in a different place, and you're not, going out all the time. And most of us are probably married. We stay home more, and we're more mature, and we're more into the history. We're more into reading. We're more into learning. And what comes along with that, if you're a sports fan, is learning about the history of the game. And if you're a card fanatic, that comes with learning about the history of cards, educating yourself on cards. Because, like I said, the vintage world can be overwhelming. So I think if you're going to move into vintage, the first suggestion that I would make is go out and buy yourself some cheap vintage cards. If you've never seen a T206 or a Cracker Jack or a T205 out of a slab, you have no idea what the card feels like, what it might smell like, how thick it is. So I suggest, if you're afraid of buying just a card that's not in a slab, go buy some cheap ones. Touch them, hold them. Start to familiarize yourself with different sets, what these cards feel like. Because in the modern era, the way to be able to afford cards you can't afford are to buy them ungraded. And we see videos all the time of grading submissions where people are buying these cards ungraded, sending them in, and getting higher grades. We are now so afraid to do that. So my suggestion is to buy some cheap ones. Get to know them. That way, when you're at a yard sale, when you're at a card shop, when you're at a flea market, even when you're shopping online, you might have a better idea of what to look for and have that comfort level. You gotta be educated. So many collectors will never touch a card, physically touch a card anymore. That's one thing. Back in the early 2000s, I was starting out in my life. I didn't have money to just go spend tons of money on cards. And so I had to be creative. And I got on to eBay. Now, I had an enormous collection from my youth. So I had lots and lots of doubles. I had 9 Rickey Henderson rookie cards, for example. And I would go through and I started selling my doubles on eBay. And I was always a vintage guy, but I do collect modern as well. I would go through and I would find old items I had, non-sports cards items, that I could sell on there to raise money to buy cards. I've sold, maybe your wife has a designer purse she hasn't used in 5 years. You could get some money for that. I would just go sell off anything I could sell, anything that was that somebody was willing to buy. I became a power seller on eBay in 3 months, and I was funding to buy my T206s and a lot of my older cards. That's something that I did. And then I was buying a lot of modern boxes. I was opening a lot of modern boxes. I would end up with 3 sets of something. And I would sell off the extra sets. I was buying McFarlane figures by the cases. And you get a ton of doubles in there. And I would sell off the ones either I didn't want or the ones I had doubles of. I was looking for the Chase figures. And if I had the Chase figure, maybe I sold off the other one. Things along those lines. I would sell, I'm a card guy. And sometimes I'd have relatives give me stuff that didn't fit into my collection. It wasn't something that I collected. One of those more Beanie Baby type of collectibles that are made to be, collectibles kind of thing. And I would sell those off. Sometimes I would just sell off stuff I didn't like. I would get some hits and, get some autograph card or relic card, and I didn't like it. And I'd sell it off, and I'd go buy me a Cracker Jack card, or like I did that to get my 53 Satchel Paige. I used to be a completist, where I wanted to have everything, and I didn't want to part with anything. And that has held me back, because I have a lot of stuff that once it was gone, I probably wouldn't miss it, but I have a hard time parting with it because I want everything. But in the realm of the modern hobby, and because sports cards, they're near infinite, you can't have everything. You can't have everything. So why not focus on what you really want? And if you're a person who doesn't have that much extra disposable income, especially with the modern prices, why not sell off what you don't want and get what you really love? Man, I just love cards. I don't know why. I love the history of cards. I love holding them. I love looking at them. I love having them. I love shopping for them. The chase is so much fun. And one other thing I did to build up my vintage collection is I went after what wasn't hot yet. I went after more obscure cards. Like if you want to have the greatest players, maybe you can't get their rookie cards. Maybe you can't get, their rarest cards. Now, at the time I was getting these things, I ended up getting rare cards of Babe Ruth and Honus Wagner. But they, at the time, weren't known to be rare, and they were obscure. People didn't know what they were. They stayed away from them, or they didn't want them. And that's changed in a big way. When I got my Sanella Margarine Babe Ruth, you had a hard time giving that card away for $100. And it was a great opportunity to get yourself a nice Babe Ruth. There are things like the 1934 Quaker Oats Premium Babe Ruth that at one time you could pick up for $120. There's the 1924 Mrs. Sherlock's pin of Babe Ruth that was real cheap, and there was Quaker Oats pins too, and there was that one that's like a counter for a baseball game. I have it over here. And you had, these game cards of like Honus Wagner you could get for a tiny fraction, Ty Cobb, those guys. And, years later, here we are now. And a lot of those cards I bought are worth thousands. Like a Babe Ruth cutout strip card that maybe you could pick up, in the early 2000s for $100 and some bucks, now worth thousands. So going after some of the more obscure things is a good idea. For me, when I was building up my collection, I didn't really care about rookie cards. And I found that I could get the entire player run for as much or cheaper than just the rookie card. And that's what I did first, you know. And then afterwards, after I started with the cards that I really liked the best. And then when I needed the big cards to finish off my set, and when I got older and when I had more money, then I would delve in and finish up those rookie cards. And I end up, the Pete Rose is the only rookie card, 1954, on that I don't have. I ended up getting them all except for that one, and I'll have to break down and get that probably at some point. But that was a strategy that I used, and I think you could still get some of these deals today. The other thing is, I was a little obsessive. I was on eBay all the time, both buying and selling. But I was always looking for, the cards that I wanted at a low cost. And I think the biggest, most important advice I could give anybody is to be patient. I can't tell you how many cards I found over the years when I was patient and got them for such a great price. Sometimes it's just an off week on eBay or at an auction, and there aren't as many eyeballs on something. For whatever reason, they're not getting the bids. Maybe people don't like the picture that's on there. Maybe it's not a big seller and it doesn't get a lot of visibility. So I save searches, and I'm always going back and looking for those searches. For instance, my main goal is to try to get one card from every vintage baseball card set. And so I'll just keep those searches, and when I'm sitting around, I'll go through and see. And I can't tell you how many times I find something for a really great price that I can add. In fact, it just happened yesterday. I'm going to be showing that card in an upcoming video. Very rare set. It's the only one PSA ever graded. And I get to add another set. And it was so cheap. So, you could set up those alerts where they email you and every new listing. And there's a lot of bogus stuff on there, a lot of reprints, a lot of things that are kind of mislabeled. But you got to weed through the noise to get to the treasure sometimes. And that's, if you look and you're patient, you will find things. Even at the National, I found some cards that I couldn't believe what I was paying. Like, my biggest pickup in my mind was my Martin Dihigo. I mean, I couldn't pay for it fast enough. I just thought it was so undervalued. And I grabbed it up. And I was patient, They were on not YouTube, they were on eBay for way more. All his cards were way more than what I paid for this at the National, which is surprising. But I was patient. So those are some tips that I thought I would give you on delving into vintage cards. Educate yourself. Buy some cheap vintage cards so you know what they feel like, you know what they look like, you know how they measure out, you know what the backs look like. And you could tell, some of the old vintage cards, they weren't all cut the same. Some of them were on a little bit of an angle. That doesn't mean that they were trimmed in any way. It doesn't. And we're in an era now where I guarantee you a lot of the cards you have are trimmed or cleaned or something. That's what people are doing. And we find a lot of those old vintage cards in high-grade PSA slabs. They're suspect. And we don't know. But I can tell you, some of them are not untouched. And, I don't know, ignorance is bliss. As time goes on, this is becoming a thing. It's just the new thing. People are going to clean caramel off the old Cracker Jack cards. I know that's been done. So don't be afraid to go buy some cheap vintage cards and get to know them. Get familiar with them, other than just a picture or cards in a slab. So, hey, that's what I have for you today. I hope maybe some of these tips helped you. Feel free to leave me questions. And, if you have any requests, leave them in the comments. I almost always respond to those kinds of things. If there was something you wanted to see, a video topic maybe you want, let me know. Hey, thanks for watching.